All right, all right. Well, hello, everyone. We'll get started here. I'm Air. I'm the executive director of Compound. Thanks so much for joining us on this late Friday afternoon. And as Serena mentioned, Compound is a creative and cultural space based here in Long Beach, California, fostering the intersection of contemporary art, wellness, and community impact. And part of our featured programming is our First Friday film series, in which we show socially conscious cinema that drives impact. And I couldn't be more excited and thrilled to kick off our series this year with the wonderful film Withdrawn Arms, which I believe you all had a chance to watch this week. It's such a powerful piece, and we're really honored and privileged to have the directors of the film with us today, Mr. Glenn Kaino and Mr. Afshin Shahidi. Thank you both for joining us. So I'm gonna give a little brief bio of these two amazing artists and then dive into the Q&A accordingly. So Glenn is a conceptual artist born and raised in Los Angeles, and his work often functions as poetic contradictions, aiming to reconcile conflicting ideologies, opposing systems, and strict dichotomies in material and experiential ways. His studio practice includes sculpture, painting, filmmaking, performance, installation, and large-scale public work. He also operates outside the traditional purview of contemporary art, instigating collaborations with other modes of culture, ranging from tech to music to political organizing. And this guy is dope. I mean, it's ridiculous. And he's also an Emmy and Webby award-winning producer and documentarian whose films have been featured at the Tribeca Film Festival and South by Southwest. Glenn is also the artist behind our inaugural laboratory exhibition at Compound Tide Pools, which I'm telling you right now is going to blow your mind. So thanks, Glenn, for being here. And my man, Afshin Shahidi, is an Iranian-born American photographer, cinematographer, filmmaker. He's worked on a variety of different projects, ranging from films, docs, music videos, commercials. He was also the main photographer for the one and only Y'all, and that's Prince, who is also a very close friend. Rest in peace to that legend. And his work has been featured on the cover of several of Prince's albums, including Prince 3121, Prince Live at the Aladdin Las Vegas, and Prince and the New Power Generation One Night Alone Live. And in 2017, he published a book of his photographs of Prince titled Prince, A Private View, which features never before seen photography of Prince. So really wonderful, Afshin, and just really welcome. And I'm really just honored to have you both here. So thank you for joining us. So
thank you for having us, man. Really exciting.
Yeah, of course. So just in terms of the format of the Q&A, I'll be asking questions to them for about 20 to 30 minutes or so, and then I'll turn it over to you all to ask any related questions. You can just put questions in the chat box, and I'll try to get to as many as possible. But I have to say, I mean, I've seen this film 2 or 3 times, and I'm literally, blown away each time. It's so powerful. The story of Tommie Smith, who's such an icon, and his moment of truth in '68 resonates, I think, even more now than ever. So I just was in awe of how you both told the story. But just to start us off, how did this whole film kind of come to be? How did you guys co-direct? How did it all happen?
So I'm presuming that everyone saw the film, and so because part of that story is told in the film in terms of, me, always knowing about, being inspired by Tommie for a very long time and having the picture of him, on the computer. I think that to give you some more of the story that wasn't in the film, I'd say, when we first started working with Tommie, or when I first started working with him to make the artwork, it really was not until I heard the class muscle story that you heard in the film when the cast first came out, and that I was like, oh, like Tommie left. I heard that story, I got chills. I was very moved. Tommie left that day. I called up Afshin immediately and I said, hey, you know what? I just heard a story that no one's ever, I know no one's ever heard, and I might have misheard it, but no one's ever heard that. And so, would you be willing to come and help me do this, because I don't make this movie without a partner like Afshin. And by way of our background together, we go back many years, to when I was actually the chief creative officer of Napster, and helping to bring digital music to everybody and reinventing the music business with Jimmy Iovine and all that stuff. And Afshin and I created actually it was almost our anniversary, Afshin, because
is that all right?
Yeah,
Hilarious.
it's like our Afshin, it must be our 15th anniversary, because in 2004 we created, or 17th, we created a commercial for the Super Bowl together. And so because this is the whole thing. It was like my friends hate, who love to hate me, would say, like, what was the first commercial that Glenn ever directed? And of course it's a Super Bowl commercial. And so I directed a Super Bowl commercial for Napster that Afshin and I created together. And it was a conceptual art project that I also showed at the Gallery Red Cap, but it was a Super Bowl commercial. And for Napster, and we ended up becoming fast friends and start collaborators, and we've been working together ever since.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and just to add to that one, Glenn, I'm sorry I didn't get you an anniversary present, because but I will make it up to you. And like Glenn said, whenever he calls, I know some sort of grand adventure awaits. I don't know if I'll make it through it alive. One of the times he called me, I ended up sitting in a drift car going 100 miles an hour sideways. And Glenn waved from the side as I went by filming. So, but of course, whenever he calls, and this was absolutely a amazing opportunity, and the relationship that he had built with Tommie was just blossoming, and Tommie was really opening up to Glenn from the artwork that they had done, and so this was just a natural progression of that. But we didn't really set out, when we first filmed Tommie, we didn't set out necessarily, we didn't say, oh, we're making a documentary. Glenn just proposed, like, hey, let's film this. Let's see. I mean, these are stories worth telling, and Tommie's agreed to put them on film. Let's see where this goes. So it took, and that was 7-8 years ago, Glenn. So
yeah,
it's
kind of like a natural kind of unfolding, and then you guys just put it all together and then made the narrative work to create a full-on doc. That's beautiful. I love that organic process. I found so many fascinating things about the film, but I think what really hit home for me was just how you captured Tommie's mind state, from what he was thinking about and feeling while he was prepping for his races and winning the race, and then also in relation to who he is as a Black man at that time. And we all just know him as raising a fist, but learning about his humanism, I just found that so powerful and really connecting more than anything else. But I'm curious from you both, what surprised you the most in learning about Tommie the man, in relation to his legacy? I mean, everyone just thinks the fist, but what did you really vibe with in terms of that connection?
Well, I'll start, and I say that I think that the way that, as Afshin said, that natural progression of us getting access to more deep stories about him happened, with the process of trust building that I have an explicit, attempt to always when I work with collaborators. For me, all of my artwork and my practice is based on building trust-based ethical relationships, and making sure that I put my work in service of the idea. Not my artwork is not in service of me. My artwork is in service of the idea, and my entire effort is in service. And so once we were able to get some of those more complicated stories, the richer stories, because at first, when Afshin and I first started filming him, we were getting the talk track that you had heard, that everyone had heard, and you'd heard a number of stories, all the basic mechanics of, oh yeah, he was ostracized or this happened, but they didn't, not really what that meant. IOC did this, and there were a lot of conflicting rumors that were going around about what happened to the medal, what happened to him, and there was a certain amount of setting the record straight part of it. But I think so all those factors were important. I think to me, you know, the one factor that I felt was the most important which motivated, you know, I think me and then us to really exert the effort to bring this home was that he's such a generous man. He's such a humble man, you know, and you know, I think that there was this, I saw that this disparity where the world had thought of him as a militant, angry man, and the man I met in his house was a gentle man in service, you know, and with sacrifice, you know, and then, you know, that big of a public perception gap for me demanded attention, you know, particularly in a moment. And actually, in that whole story about Oprah, I actually did talk to Oprah about him more extensively than just, hey, you know, meet him. But I was talking to him, and you know, Oprah, you know, was very supportive. But one of the conversations, I said, Oprah, we're in a moment where people feel that one of the only things that they can own is their own story. You know, like
right.
I'm economically burdened. You know, now we're climate burdened with COVID. You know, and there's so much burden, and that burden is exacerbated by the perception of burden through technology, right, and through FOMO. Things that FOMO didn't exist years ago. You didn't even know that you didn't have what other people didn't have. I never even knew private planes existed when I was a kid until you know, now kids know that they're because of rappers and because of, you know, and those rappers are on not even private planes because they're getting busted by flying culture and they're on planes. You know what I mean? But it's all there's this perception of loneliness, and the only thing you own is your own story. So to have someone like Tommie, who has authored a symbol which has meant so much to so many, and for him to offer that to Afshin and myself to help tell together, you know, as this moment of unity, and to show and not tell that, you know, we can actually share and have permission to contribute and to talk to each other and to have these like robust moments of healing together. To me, that was like, we need to do this. And that was like the primary motivation in that respect. So.
Yeah.
And for me to echo Glenn's words, I think a lot of times we hold our idols and our heroes and even villains on pedestals, and they're superhuman, and which Tommie certainly is. But when you meet him, it's his humanity, which you don't see in that image necessarily. You don't see in the other films, documentaries, whatever has been said about him. And so to meet him and to find this really gentle man, and to really listen to him reckon with what he's gone through his whole life, and never regret a moment, because that stand really cost him a lot, and to never regret a single instant of that was really moving. And so that, for me, that was touching, just realizing, and this happens a lot when you meet like a celebrity or something, like, okay, yeah, they are human. When you realize that your parents are actually human, you know, and flawed, and so to find that out about Tommie on such a personal level was really fulfilling and moving.
Yeah, that really well said. And it's funny, you know, when I was growing up as a kid, you know, that fist, you know, Glenn, you was talking about the symbol of that fist. I mean, it represented so much for me as a young Black kid. You know, my dad would show me pictures of Tommie and books and old photographs, and it was all about strength and courage and pride and determination, you know, in this so-called white man's world. And, you know, you need that kind of revolutionary energy to kind of make it through. It's all about like, just, you know, not giving up, essentially, you know. And then I realized it wasn't just for me, it was for, you know, the whole community of people of color. And I just find it interesting now, you know, it's 2021, and, you know, we're on the heels of probably the craziest year of all of our lives. And we're dealing with the same human rights issues. It's like Groundhog Day that we faced back then. And so, you know, showing this film, the timeliness of it was just incredible. But, you know, the legacy of Tommie and the fist, and we'll talk about, like, you know, obviously Colin and that correlation as well, but the legacy of that fist, what do you think that means now to this new generation or to young people? You know, the young generation is facing so much with, you know, climate change and all kinds of social justice issues, and we're bringing back something that was, you know, really representative of, you know, the struggle into today's world. So what do you think it means to young people today?
I think that Well, we're hoping, and I think that I'm hoping, and when we talk about this work, that what we're trying to do is just give access to the young people of today who are using that salute just to additional histories and layers of meaning on that, so they can connect with the robustness of the sacrifice and everything that came before. I mean, it's not lost on us, and it hasn't been lost on us that you see David Hogg up there with March for Our Lives with the fist, and you see all the young people out there doing that, and athletes and whatnot. And I think that one thing I guess the most important thing is that this is, as I hopefully we conveyed a bit in the film, which is this is a multi-generational thing. The fight for justice will likely never end, because there is a constant ebb and flow, and power always shifts, but what is most important is that we don't give up, that we can connect ourselves to the legacy, and so what we're hoping is that the kids these days, and the younger folks who see that, particularly like our generation who maybe grew up after we were able to see it live, and then, our children who are seeing it through textbooks only, who are only hearing about it, and who might see someone mimicking it. I'm sure there are young people who saw Jesse Williams do it at the BET Awards, who thought like, wow, that was a great thing that Jesse Williams did. You know what I mean? And don't even know that the legacy, of that before that, and so I think our gesture with this film is to, and hence then also the nature of the bridge was to just, let you know that you are emboldened and empowered, with the sacrifices of your elders. And, this is an ongoing thing. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree, and I think you captured a lot of that in the film in and of itself. One of my favorite scenes is with Invisible Man, and you have the dudes kind of step out, and you see all the different generations, right there in that formation. I just thought that was really well captured, image-wise, and yeah, I think that's beautiful. Yeah, like I was saying earlier, I mean, there's just no denying the correlation between Tommie's fist and Colin Kaepernick's taking a knee. And it's really interesting because raising a fist is more, it feels like uplifting, like let's stand up for our rights, let's make it happen, just from the physical gesture of that. And I felt like Colin's, taking a knee in terms of sacrificing everything to let it be known about the killing of Black bodies. Was more, almost somber in many respects. Like let's take a moment. It's more earthy. I just found it as an interesting dynamic, and having that in the film, kind of showing that interesting relationship. I'm curious from you, like, what did you see in those two different moments? What was reflective for you as filmmakers, understanding the context of Colin making that courageous stance and Tommie raising his fist?
I think you should go, Glenn, because I'm thinking about it. That's a great question, and I don't have a good answer, but
I think well, I think one of the things that we heard, and so awesome when Afshin and I, first of all, like we could have made a film, and Afshin and I are making a personal whole movie if y'all want to see about the making of this thing, because each one of these little vignettes alone were a crazy story. And it was like there were 9,000 phone calls, pleas, begs, and we were on our knees trying to make everything in this film happen. It's been an incredible journey. And introducing Colin to Tommie was no small feat either. But one thing that was a revelation in a way was hearing Tommie talk about how his parents, and this is not in the film, but his parents, his dad particularly, made him and his brothers take a knee every night, right? And they took a knee every night in a knee of prayer. And Tommie explained the paradox of this contradiction of the world getting mad at Colin, which is a kneel is a gesture of humility, right? You kneel before God, and you kneel you kneel in service. Tommie was like, look, this is a defiant gesture. This is like, hey, I'm standing up. I'm making myself taller, right? I'm making my body taller. I'm extending my hand towards God. I'm like making myself bigger. A kneel is really about being in service and humility. So the fact that, so-called Christian right-wingers are having a problem with a man just saying that, kneeling in service, putting his body in service, putting his whole gesture in service, and conveying that humility is, I think, something that is the grand contradiction of how the world responded to Colin Kaepernick. You know, I think one of the things that Tommie, another difference, let's say, is that, you know, Tommie was not able to or required to, you know, be in as much media firestorm, you know, as Colin was, after his salute. But I think that you know, the oppositional gestures, so to speak, getting the same response. What that shows to me, it shows to us, is it really isn't about the gesture. It's about the defiance of Black bodies. You know, it's about the systemic racism in this country that wants athletes and wants performers and wants people of color and wants people to do their job. And as we said in the film, what's the report saying, shut up, you know? Well, that is a direct correlation to slave labor. Like, what that means is you are only here to do a certain thing that I will allow you to do, and you're forbidden from having a voice, right? And even if that voice is silent, you are forbidden to have that, you know? And so the fact that those two gestures, which are oppositional in performativity, right, both unleash the same backlash, right? Just says, you know, the what part it hasn't changed is the subtext of racism that from which this entire country has been built, so that it is not even unexpected that one would have such a violent reaction to what every day in church these people are told stands for humility, you know, and nonviolence, you know. So
yeah. Preach, brother, preach. Damn.
Wow, that is right on.
100%. Well, you know, it's interesting because I think one of the first lines in the film was when Tommie says, "My running became my voice," and, you know, in reference to him speaking up about human rights. And you know, I'm really curious because we see this so much nowadays with LeBron, you know, speaking out and various others. It takes a lot of courage because, you know, you're a brand and you have to kind of balance out, you know, who you are as a brand, who you are as a human, who you are as an activist. Is there a responsibility now that everyone should, excuse me, exercise that voice? Is that something that should be how athletes, how celebrities really kind of convey the messaging to impact change? You know, I mean, there's a lot of different things packaged within that, but I mean, Ali was the first to kind of really set it off, and I think, you know, Tommie and so many others have been leaders to kind of take that courage and do that. But is there a responsibility, do you think?
Yeah, I think
got
that
this one too.
Yeah, I think that I don't know if there's a responsibility more so than there is the opportunity, right? Because one thing that's different too, just to be clear, is that Tommie went from having no money to not having any chance to make money, right? Ali and Colin, they were making money and they sacrificed some money, but they still had money. You know, Tommie was sitting there in Mexico City without having no flight home, not figuring out how to feed his kids and buy his kids Similac. You know, he tells a story. He literally did not have enough money to buy the next bottle of food for his infant son, right? And so, you know, to that extent, one would say, shit, everyone has the responsibility. If the man with no money did that and sacrificed everything. But I think that, you know, all it shows is that the possibility for that to exist is, but I think it's too harsh in a way to be prescriptive about how anyone should or has the responsibility to. I think it's the opportunity exists for that to happen, you know. Michael Jordan has been long accused of not doing enough, but you know, but we watch The Last Dance and you hear his rationalization and you hear what he has or has not done and you figure stuff out. And, you know, Kyrie's doing stuff behind the scenes. Kyrie comes off like a kook, you know, in half the press. And then what he's hiding is the fact that, you know, he is, you know, balancing the paychecks of the entire WNBA during the COVID. Like, that's crazy, you know. It's amazing things that, you know, people are doing in different ways. But and I can't speak to the personal brand part, but I do think that, you know, it has to. Again, I don't have the luxury of having that problem, but I think that it's something that certainly, you know, people have to think about. So
and I think also, if they choose to, hopefully we get to a place where people are not penalized for speaking out, which is kind of what's happened and is continuing to happen. And even Megan really says it beautifully, because she's like, me and Colin are pretty much saying the same thing, maybe in different ways, but I look different. And so I'm held up to esteem, and Colin has lost his career. So
Mm.
that dichotomy right there just speaks volumes about where this country is at, and how people are viewed. So hopefully, as we move forward, and if athletes, celebrities, whoever decide to speak up, they don't have to pay this grand price for it.
And I will say one other thing, I don't want to bust him in public, but I will say this, like there is a family that is actually navigating this thing super crazy well, who have built their family brand on standing up for the right thing, and still are in the middle of executing world takeover, and that is the Shahidi family. And so for reals though, and if you think about what type of intersectional family is like Afshin is the new model for America, in my opinion, because this is a family unit that is intersectional in composition, right? Whose brand is based on empathy, standing up, do the right thing, but courageously, the entire family is full of hits. Everyone makes hits. The whole family. You know what I mean? And so look, if that's not aspirational for the power of possibility, I think it is what it is. And so that it's kudos to Afshin, and our family has watched him raise his family and navigate those waters in a very sophisticated sense. But I think it's pure. And I think that what hopefully Afshin, Carrie, Yara, the family, as well as Colin, these people are proving that you can actually build a business on doing the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, build up on that a little bit, Afshin, about how you, as a father, kind of brought that into your family. I mean, I'm a brand new dad. My son is 1 years old. So I know you have some gems for me of like how did you set them up for that?
I married really well. I married.
Okay, I got that one.
Yeah. So if you do that, that's more than half the battle. And then really, I mean, I come from, and my wife comes from a family of educators and activists and humanitarians. And so it was just passed on to us naturally. And so we've passed it on to our kids. So I can't take much credit for necessarily doing anything different than what I saw, as I was growing up. So a lot of it is just continuing that legacy. And then my daughter, Yara, is just a really old soul, and she's just evolved us, 100-fold and taken it to a whole nother level. And really, I appreciate, Glenn, what you said, but so much of what we do and what we look at and the types of work, and even when it comes to commerce, the types of endorsement deals, they have to have a worldview. They have to have the ability to kind of move the language forward. And so Yara is really picky in what she decides to do. Again, I like I said, Carrie is amazing and can take so much of this and process it, and then make those decisions. And then together, it's worked for us. I've been lucky to know Glenn and actually watch him, because he is so prolific. And I think I've asked you several times, like, how do you do all the things you do in one day? Because I wake up and I can maybe get one thing done, and then I stop at Glenn's studio one day, right? And it's one thing, and I go there 2 days later, and it's a whole different, amazing thing. So I'm trying to be like Glenn.
Yeah,
I'm
trying to be like Glenn too. And speaking of Glenn and your prolificness, I really want to kind of talk about the art installations that I think were just profound. I mean, through and through. In the film, I mean, Invisible Man is still my favorite piece that you've done, because I think it, to me, art is all about questioning. It's all about reflecting, and I think you physically did that with the work. But you're talking about, I mean, you can see the whole world within this piece. And so I don't know. I mean, does art have a responsibility to kind of bring in these cultural dynamics and historical, political kind of lifestyles into their work? I mean, I can't separate the two personally, but I'm just curious, like how did you come up with a lot of those concepts? I mean, I know it's part of who you are as an artist, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll address both, like two parts of those questions. One is I do think art, however, unlike every athlete, I do think art has the responsibility. I think all art is political, and I say that because I think that putting something into the world for interpretation in this moment or in any moment is not only a reflection but an assertion and will of what can be and what should be and how things are. And so, I personally think that I make art to well, first of all, I make art for ideas that I don't have the words for, otherwise I'd write about them. But I make art for ways also to interact with the public in ways, and it's certainly a utopic practice where I believe it's the responsibility of artists and image makers to show and to suggest things, and to create slippages in what we know, so that people can think about things that we don't necessarily know yet, or things that they think might not be possible. And the Invisible Man artwork, for example, started out with a long-term exploration and interrogation of the value of monuments, and monuments are actually, he's like, oh, what's that statue? And it's like, well, what that statue is. That statue is, to be super nerdy about it, that is a epistemological time machine. It is an idea from the past that someone in the past said, I want someone to learn about this in the future. And so it's so stubborn of an idea that it's like, I'm going to make something so that no one can, it's going to be so big and heavy that it can't be moved. And we're finding out that they can be moved. But the idea is that monumentality is you can't be moved. So future generations are going to be forced to contend with this idea. That's what monuments are about. And what I thought was, we were existing in this time of the fragility of this knowledge, and I was questioning knowledge, saying, hey, you know what? Maybe there's some ideas from the past that need to be let go, and we found that out in this sort of taking down this Confederate stuff. But maybe maybe not every idea is good to be set in stone, and maybe the monument is the version of history being written by the victors and trying to, it is a reflection of the mortality, of the slave owner, of the people who have just like want to, they're insistent to their ideas go forward, right? And so I was working on the fragility of that. And I was thinking about, oh, how do we make a monument that vanishes itself? Because the monument itself is self-reflexively aware that that idea might not always be relevant, or might not always be relevant in the same way. And so I started to think about, shit, how do I, because I do a lot of work in magic as well. I have another film project out on Hulu right now in and of itself. Not to plug that, yeah. But I was like, how do we make a monument that the audience can perform itself? And we discovered, how to do it. And then Tommie's story being so fragile, was one of the first ones that we did, and it was a very beautiful thing. And I would say the byproduct of doing it, because the first time we did it, and Afshin and I were in Miami, I made one with sort of the artist Charles Gaines, and I scanned his body, and it was hands up, don't shoot, and we did it in Miami, and it was like 6 feet up on a pedestal, so it literally disappeared into the clouds, and it was beautiful. But it wasn't on ground level. And I had never seen it on ground level. And then we made Tommie's, and we said, you know what? There's this moment of audience interaction that might happen where not only will the monument disappear, but maybe people will be interested in seeing themselves in Tommie's silhouette. And we did it. And that's when the complication and the duality of Invisible Man came into play, where on one hand, if you look at it from other angles, it vanishes. But if you're right in front of it, you see yourself in it as well. And that's when, we all got chills. It was like, wow, that's amazing to see Tommie, look at himself, or other people looking at themselves, in Tommie. It became something else. And I love it when an artwork of mine takes a life of its own and it becomes something else. And I just kind of like feed it and like, oh, this is just going to a place. And Invisible Man was certainly one of those. So.
And just quickly, the fact that what you were saying about monuments being, people in history saying we want people in the future. What's beautiful about the Invisible Man is that it's going to be historical. It'll be around long after we're gone, but it's going to tie that future or that past to the future because you've made it interactive in that way. And I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt. What was that moment like when I mean, you capture it really, really great on film, when Tommie first saw Bridge, I mean, I'm just curious from as an artist, like what does that do for you viscerally when you witnessed him seeing that work, that moment, all the things that you put together in the film, learning about him, and in that immediate moment, just describe that for me.
I mean, that's sort of, it's very hard to describe, but I will also reveal, this is like another behind the scenes Q&A type answer. I'll say that was the first time Tommie saw it in his hometown. So that reaction you saw was the pride, but in fact, Tommie had actually seen a version of the bridge before. And there was an image that was in the film of it in this big warehouse, that was in Washington, DC. And that was the first time, and we didn't film that part, but that was the first time he actually ever saw the bridge in person. And I took him to, two things happened that night when I walked him over to go see that piece. We were walking from the hotel, and I said to him on the walk over, this is like years before, I just started filming stuff. I was like, we just walking, I said, hey, did you ever run a relay? And I should have known. And he was like, of course I did, son. I got 3 world records on a relay. And I was like, okay. And I was like, because I had a dream last night. Tommie says, what do you mean? I said, I had a dream that you were passing the baton to President Obama. And maybe I'm thinking about like a spec Puma spot, but like, in my head, I was like, we got a thing. And so I actually had angled the piece in the DC museum to point at the White House just as a karmic gesture. Like somehow we're going to get into the damn White House. I do not know how, but I'm going to point this thing right there. And I had started seeding the rumors like, oh, Glenn pointed at the White House just to see if even in DC the word would get around. Like there's this sculpture pointed at the White House. I didn't have any idea. And so as we walk up to the door, right, it was curated by Shamim Moments, land, and we walk up and the didactic text on the wall, and we're about to enter, and Tommie sees his picture and the word Tommie Smith and the arms, and an older African-American man walks up to us like right before we're about to walk in, and he peeks in because the door's open, and apparently he works as a custodial agent at one of the federal buildings next door,
Cool.
and he points at Tom and he says, my mom would never, he goes, are you Tommie Smith? And Tommie's like, I am, sir. And he goes, are you Glenn Kaino? Are you the artist? And I said, yes, I am. And he says, my mom would never let me do what you do. And my mom would never let me do what you do. And we were like, and Tommie's like, what is that? So, what is that, sir? Because he's older than Tommie. And he says, I wanted to be an artist, and my mom would never let me stand up because it was not safe. And he was, and I am telling you, he was crying. Tommie and I were crying at that moment, and we walked in, and that, like, I'm not a guy who cries at his own work per se, because I'm so overwhelmed. It was the only moment where I walked into that show with Tommie, and there was, again, it was so not about me, not about my work, not about the authorship of anything. It was about this moment of reverence, that space became a sacred space, and when we did that, that's when we knew that we were creating a sacred space for these memories and for these futures. And even in the High Museum, what you saw when people went into that museum, and even in San Jose too, you did the same thing. People would go there and spend many, many moments, in the space, because, it was like a library. People would shut up, and they start, thinking, and the conversation stopped, and, it just became like a reverent, sacred space. So for me, that was exciting. And I had not witnessed that before in any other work. I got a lot, I've been like, but not like that moment. And so very, very humbling. So.
Amazing. Wow. Beautiful. I mean, I have so many questions, but I'm going to stop and see if anyone from the audience has any questions for Glenn or Afshin. You can just throw them in the chat. And while we're waiting for the questions to come in, I do have that moment. I think it was mostly in the beginning, but I think this was archival. But the one shot when the start of the race happens, for me, it was like so symbolic of so many different things. And the most immediate reaction was a startling kind of effect for me, because I think when I hear those kind of guns, like the one shot, I immediately go to police brutality. It's weird. It's like a weird visceral feeling. And the way how close it was, it really brought me into that moment. Was that a conscious choice for, and maybe Afshin, I know you shot it, and I mean, this is archival, but I mean, was that a conscious choice to try to invoke some sort of feeling about guns in general?
Well, I don't know if it was so much about guns, and Glenn, jump in, but we played with that shot and kind of finding the right way to do it. So it wasn't so much necessarily just about guns, but a visual component of all the races that he ran, because we utilized that image several times, and we were making it turn almost like a dial of a clock, just also to show the passage of time. And it was, I think Tommie said, you know, every race that I ran was what I needed to win to get to that point.
Mm.
Yeah,
know, to make it into the Olympics.
And the last shot was Martin, you know. So we did rotate the hand. We did rotate the hand, and because it was not lost on us that gunshot, black men run. Like gunshot, black men run.
That's what I'm saying.
Gunshot, black men run.
Yeah,
you know, gunshot, black men dead. You know, and so I actually made a painting, a series of paintings that rotate. You know, and so if you take just that shot that we shot, and if you rotate it the right way, the canvas is misaligned on the wall, but the gun points at you. You know, and that was a situation where you know, we did like 5 different types of shots to figure that one out. Yeah, and honestly, I mean, people, when I'm happy that you know, caught that, because that was for you. You know, because some people saw that and said, you know, one of our producers was like, you need to take that out, because like, why are you doing the same shot again? And I'm like, well, that's the art, man. Like, this is a piece inside of a piece. You know, you're not getting that. All we're doing is we're showing this. You know, we're showing, you know, this correlation between violence and reaction and athleticism and running, and then again, that's why it's the shot's like, you know, a few frames longer right before Martin gets killed, and then the sound rings a little bit longer into an echo right before we walk into that little audio moment with the you know, MLK text on there. So
yeah, man, it was so powerful, man. Yeah, thanks for giving it some context. Okay, so a few questions from the audience. The first one is how long did it take to get the Wheaties project off the ground? Which is, first of all, we were just talking about this earlier, but I mean, it's been all over the news, man. I mean, it's crazy what's going on today. But Glenn, give some context to that.
Well, Afshin and I are sitting in the airport lounge in Atlanta after a interview with Tommie, and we had heard him. Look, and Tommie's not a complainer, right? But he will definitely tell you the truth in a context to make us aware of situations. And you know, for many moments he was saying he was never got an apology from the Olympic Committee, and it was not in the Olympic Hall of Fame, and he was never on the cover of a Wheaties box. You know, so Afshin and I are sitting there drinking our, you know, juice boxes, you know, at the airport lounge from our, you know, whatever competing platinum status, you know, whatever.
I don't even think we had any status. We were sitting in like the restaurant.
Delta, yeah, we were in the restaurant. It was no status, you know, and Afshin's like, we should do that, you know. It's like, get the fuck out, we should do it. And then we're like, okay, who do we know? And I had done an art lecture for an agency called 72 and Sunny, and they had represented another division of General Mills. So I called Kelly, who was the host of that talk, and then gave us some phone numbers, you know, many years ago. And you saw in the film called Taylor, and you know, Taylor is a hero for us. And just this week we announced it. So it took, was it 3.5 years now to get to today? You know,
I mean, it was a reoccurring theme when we talked to Tommie, as Glenn said, but I guess you could also say it took 50 years because it didn't happen. You know, after he won, after he was a gold medal champion, you know, on a world stage. So we're happy it finally did, though.
Seriously, wow, yeah, it's just an incredible moment, and yeah, like I said, I mean, what you got 1 billion and whatever impressions today.
Yeah, it's media takeover now, man.
Media takeover. It's insane, man. Okay, another question is from Lori. Can you speak to the visual devices that you deemed were the most aesthetic and the most conceptual in the film? And speak to turning to the device of animation and suturing that into the film and the logic around that. Because I thought that was incredible how you guys used the animation and really brought that moment, which is really dark, you know, for Tommie to life. But yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, that story that he told, Afshin and I were the first people outside of a very small group of his family to ever hear that story. You know, they had not told that story. That was really, I'd say there were 2 or 3 stories that were big, like very close to his heart and mind, that he did not feel comfortable sharing to anyone before us. You know, one was the small ones, like the class model, amazing, poetic, you know, very powerful. The FBI story, scary for them, you know, connecting them with COINTELPRO and all this stuff is very scary. But that story was, has to have been, right, Afshin, like the most, not taboo, but the most protected story. And because it was Tommie at the most vulnerable, right? And this is a guy who, for 50 years, you know, 47 years before he met, you know, me, whatever, had lived building an armor around himself, you know, to defend himself, you know, from the world that attacked him from that day forward, you know. And the idea that we were going to tell this story of his humanity, vulnerability, and mentally as well as physically, you know, like you don't, that's not something that an athlete processes, you know, and until Afshin and I sat down with him for hours and talking about how, you know, at this frame of education, his vulnerability was a strength. You know, his sharingness was power. You know, it wasn't power, it wasn't weakness, you know, because there's a correlation with that story being weak, you know. Oh, I had these weak-minded thoughts. I was weak. I ended up getting cut. I get hurt. You know, and I was like, no. You sharing this is the most powerful thing, you know.
I couldn't agree more.
You know,
yeah.
And then you know, telling that through talking heads was one thing, and yeah, we could have, like, we have the footage that we could have shown people crying, you know, for 20 minutes down that story. But I think that the better connection to the audience was using the framework of some drawings I made, these charcoals. And then working with Kirill, who is our animation team leader, who was inspired by, you know, my charcoals, and just like, Kirill just took it to, you know, 1,000 times crazier, you know, but to really use the technique of animation, you know, in that way. And I think that when Afshin and I were working with Kirill, what was really cool was the thing about how animation works is you know, through silence, even though there's a narrative, you know, you're able to create semiotic connections and powerful connections using aesthetics in ways that are outside of the physics of normal life. You know, we can see Tommie metaphorically crashing through a table that we don't have to break. You know, we can see him exert emotions that he was not able to do at this moment. And so I think that that's where the animation part was the necessary part. And Afshin and I spent, you know, dozens of hours in the studio looking at, you know, working with Kirill and designing through all the different variations, and, you know.
Yeah, I think we figured out it was a moment we didn't want to do like a recreation, something like a cheesy recreation.
I was just going to say that, a reenactment,
Yeah, and there had been talk not of reenactments, not for that necessarily, but just, you know, close-ups of different things that there weren't archival footage for. But that definitely we knew could not be a reenactment. And then just going back to, you know, the strength of Tommie sharing that with us, it took a lot for him. Like Glenn said, that's one of those things that nobody knew about at all. Probably a lot of family members didn't know either. And so for him to share that with us first and then agree to, you know, share it with the world, because that wasn't immediately the, you know, the idea behind it. It was just him opening up to us. You know, so I thought it was powerful for him to decide to, again, share that vulnerability and that piece of his humanity.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely. Okay, the next question is you talked in the movie about Tommie's action being one of the most powerful pieces of performance art. Can you talk about the connection between acts of protest and performance art?
Yeah, I think what I meant in the film was that, like, when I heard Tommie talk about it, you know, the salute, like he didn't talk about it in terms of it wasn't an accident, right? Every element of his performance that night was premeditated. You know, like I sat down with him and I was like, "What's going on that night?" You know, and I had heard him say this before, but like being in person and hearing someone do something is different. You know, he's like, you know, I'm a former military, ROTC, so I turned with a military gesture because he literally said I wanted to sign and tell people that I was a patriot, right? I bowed my head in prayer to let people know that I was a religious man, and this was done in humility, you know. And just like as he went, just every piece of that thing that you see is like the black socks, and
That's
when
wild,
I asked him
man.
things like, I asked him questions to get him into a different mind space. I was like, yo, did you walk out on the grass with no shoes on? Like, how did that feel on your feet? You know, he was like, no one's ever asked me that question before. I said, well, do me a favor. When you talk to us, feel the grass on your feet. Was it damp? You know, it was in the evening time, you know, and he's like, I was, you know, it's like, well, you know, just little techniques that, you know, I might have to like help get him in the mindset to reveal different emotions of it. But, you know, all of that stuff was like premeditated, and, you know, it's not dissimilar to when I talk to choreographers, you know, who choreograph performances, and, you know, and this is the thing too about like performance art versus like dance, right? Which is cool. And then we're splitting hairs here, but like, you know, there's a need for everything to be kind of like on cue with dance, but not contemporary dance, but, you know,
Right.
you know, performance, it's conceptual cues, there's bases from which one, you know, decide to kind of sign and do gestures. And, you know, I just thought that it was a beautiful way that he puts that together, and
Yeah.
you know, it seemed
And
relevant.
he even says at one point in the film, as a young man, and this is how well thought out it was, the fact that he had one fist up, John had the other, and it formed a U. And I can't unsee that now when I look at that image of the U for unity. So every piece was choreographed.
Yeah,
it's incredible. Great. Okay, I think we have time for maybe two more questions. But for me, living in Long Beach, LA, a lot of the images and locations in the film hit close to home. So Glenn, just want to hear about your experience as a Cali native, helping to tell the California part of Tommie's story.
well, I'd say this is the thing about which I hope resonates, but for me, for being from California, it was you know, so crazy. Yeah, this is the whole thing, the whole film, right? Like you see a picture in a history book, and you think, oh, this is like meta, right? This is like the global history of the world, you know. And then a friend of yours comes to your shop and says, hey, you want to meet him? That's my coach. And you're like, wait a minute, hold on. It's like, Luke, I'm your father. The entire world collapses into something that's so local. You're like, this is impossible. You know, it's like how is that possible? You know. And so I mean, for me, the Cali part was like, no way, this guy was in Santa Monica for 25 years. And I have so many scholar friends who have written about Tommie Smith, who have like made artwork about Tommie Smith, and you know, one dude does an Olympic this, another dude does a fist salute that, and no one's reached out to this guy. This guy's right around the corner. And as she knows the way I am, I'm like, yo, let's just call the guy. You know, I'm not afraid of calling a guy. You know, I was like, and so this, I mean, and I guess for me, like you know, born in East LA, grew up for most of my life in a suburb called Cerritos. And, you know, we used to watch, you know, b-boying on TV, and an old pop locker named Shabba-Doo moved down the street, and we were like, hey, that's Shabba-Doo. We just ride to his house, and we was like, hey, teach me how to pop. You know what I mean? It was like, yeah, next thing you know, you sit down with Shabba-Doo. You know, and the world just becomes small. You know, when you find out that the guy from the history book, you know, is down the street. You know, and then you know, as you get older, it's like Atlanta, you know, is a 3-hour, you know, 4-hour flight away. You know, but finding out that Tommie spent so many of his, you know, important, powerful, hard sacrifice years, you know, down the street is mind-numbing. And what it makes you think is like, wow, what else is happening in my backyard, you know, that I can be a part of helping? You know, what like is my neighbor, you know, contributing in a way and needs help, and how are these things happening? And you know, it really just collapses to me the world, and that's why it was very, you know, having the California part was important, because you know, I think it sends a powerful message for all of us that, you know, I mean, and Afshin has a fantastic story from you know, him seeing the salute as a young person and coming out, you know, so I'll throw it to you on the global story.
Well, definitely. I mean, as you mentioned, I'm Iranian. I left Iran right before the revolution, before everything really kind of heated up, and I'm a child of revolution. And so when I came and I saw that image as a young person, again, I think maybe in a history book or somewhere, and not really knowing much about the civil rights movement and what was happening, the history of this country at that point, to me, it was this symbol of defiance. And all I could think about is if that was happening in Iran, if someone in Iran protested in that way, what would happen to them? You know, the immense pain that they would feel as a result. So that image really kind of burned into my mind too, from really a young age. And then later on, I went to the library. We didn't have Google or anything. So I went to the library, looked it up and learned more about it, and really just kind of opened my eyes. So I think it speaks volumes, and the fact that it happened in Mexico City and it was viewed around the world just makes it even that much more powerful.
Wow, yeah, that is super powerful. Well, we're at time, but yeah, I'm just reflective on so many elements of what you both have shared, and thank you so much. And I know the audience and everybody listening really just kind of got a lot out of this conversation, and more so even more depth into the film, because it's one of those films that I think when you see over and over again, you just get more and more enriched. And so I just hope that people continue to support both of your work through and through, and also really take the elements of what Tommie represents back then and today into their daily lives, and really have the power and the courage to speak up and to utilize their voice. So I love y'all, man. Y'all my homies.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I
So
can't
good
wait
to
to
meet
see
you,
everyone at
everybody. Thank you.
Compound. See
Yeah.
you all at
Yeah,
Compound.
totally. Yes, totally. Yes. So yeah, everyone be safe out there, and we appreciate everyone for joining, and have a wonderful Super Bowl weekend.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.